17 years ago, my younger brother abandoned his own 12-year-old son on my doorstep and disappeared without explanation. Today he walked into the reading of my will, sat across from the lawyer, and said coldly, "I'm the only blood family he had left." He didn't know I was sitting behind a hidden wall listening to every word, and he had no idea the black USB drive on the table held the truth about the old fire, the child he threw away, and the plan he built for years to steal everything from the boy I raised as my own. Before we go any further, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I read every single one. A quick note, some elements of this story have been shaped for storytelling and reflection. Names and places are fictional, but the lesson underneath is one worth keeping. I have always believed that the most dangerous thing a man can do is let his enemies underestimate him. Not because it flatters the ego. I have never had much patience for ego, but because underestimation is a weapon, a precise one. The kind that doesn't make noise until it's already done its work. That was the thought running through my mind on a Thursday morning in October 2024, as I sat in a small room behind Margaret Vance's office and watched 6 people arrange themselves around a conference table on a monitor the size of a dinner tray. The room I was sitting in was not on any floor plan. Maggie had built it into the original renovation 20 years ago, back when she handled enough sensitive cases that a private observation space made practical sense. She had mentioned it to me once offhand, the way you mention something you assume will never be relevant. I had filed it away and said nothing. That was 11 years ago. I had been sitting in that room for 40 minutes. The coffee Maggie's assistant had left for me was cold. I didn't mind. On the monitor, Cole arrived first. He came in with Natalie at his side the way he did everything quietly, without announcing himself, as if the space he occupied was simply where he happened to be standing. He was 29 years old and carried himself like a man who had learned early that composure was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. I had watched him develop that quality over 17 years, and I was not going to pretend I wasn't proud of it. Natalie sat to his right. She set her bag on the floor, folded her hands on the table, and looked at the door. She had the particular stillness of someone who knows something difficult is coming and has already decided how to meet it. Russell came in 4 minutes later. I had not seen my brother in 14 months. He had aged in the way that men age when they have been running from consequences for too long, not badly exactly, but with a kind of compressed tension around the eyes that suggested the math was no longer working out in his favor. He was wearing a dark suit that fit well and a tie that was slightly too expensive for the occasion, which told me everything I needed to know about how he had decided to play the morning. Behind him came Patrick Gould, 31 years old, 3 years out of Yukon law, the kind of attorney who billed aggressively and prepared thoroughly, and had not yet learned that preparation is only useful when you understand what you're preparing for. He carried a leather folder and set it on the table with the careful precision of someone who wanted it noticed. Russell looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Neither of them spoke. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds and contained 17 years of history. Frank Hargrove came through the side entrance at 9:52. Which meant he had been in the building longer than anyone else and had chosen to wait. That was Frank, always positioning, always thinking 3 moves ahead, always slightly miscalculating which 3 moves mattered. He sat across from Russell without acknowledging him, which was interesting. They had been meeting privately for the better part of a year. The performance of distance was for Cole's benefit. Frank set a pen on the table and began turning it over in his fingers. I had watched him do that in meetings for 32 years. It meant he was managing anxiety. I noted it and moved on. The door opened again at 9:57. Laura Novak came in with Oliver at her side, a 10-year-old boy with his father's jawline and his mother's eyes, wearing a collared shirt that someone had clearly ironed that morning. Laura was dressed simply, her expression composed in the way of a person who has made a difficult decision and arrived at peace with it. She did not look at Russell. She guided Oliver to 2 chairs along the side wall, said something quietly to him, and sat. Russell had seen her come in. His jaw tightened by a fraction. Gould leaned over and said something. Russell shook his head once. I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. Maggie entered at exactly 10 o'clock, which was not a coincidence. In 30 years of knowing Margaret Vance, I had never once seen her arrive at an imprecise moment. She set a folder on the table, adjusted her chair, looked around the room with the measured attention of someone taking inventory, and said, "Thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I want to confirm that this proceeding is being recorded under Connecticut probate rules with notice given to all parties. If anyone has an objection, now is the time. Gould said, "On behalf of Russell Mercer, we reserve the right to contest any—" "Noted," Maggie said without looking up. "Anyone else?" Silence. "Then we'll begin." She opened the folder. I watched Russell's hands on the table, still controlled the hands of a man who had rehearsed patience. I watched Frank's pen slow its rotation and stop. I watched Cole, who had not moved since he sat down, who was looking at Maggie with the focused calm of someone who knew exactly what was coming and had already decided it would not move him. What none of them knew, not Russell, not Frank, not Gould, with his leather folder and his careful preparation, was that the most important person in that room was not sitting at that table. He was sitting in a room with no floor plan, drinking cold coffee and waiting for the moment he had spent 18 months building toward. They thought I was too weak to walk into that room. That was the last mistake they would ever make about me. The room behind Maggie's office was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation system running in the ceiling. I had time to think. That was fine. I had spent the better part of 63 years thinking, and I had gotten reasonably good at it. I thought about the first truck. It was a 1987 Ford F350 white with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I had taped over with electrical tape and never bothered to fix. I bought it in the spring of 1989 with $11,000 I had saved over 6 years of working construction for other people. Men who built things well and charged fairly and still somehow managed to treat the people who worked for them as interchangeable parts. I had decided at 31 that I was done being an interchangeable part. Mercer Construction Supply started as exactly that, a supply operation. Not construction, not contracting just materials. Lumber, concrete, rebar fixtures. I drove that truck 6 days a week across Hartford County, building relationships with site managers and project foremen, learning which contractors paid on time and which ones didn't, which suppliers were reliable and which ones would leave you short on a Friday afternoon. Within 3 years, I had 2 trucks and a leased warehouse on Weathersfield Avenue. Within 5, I had accounts in 3 counties. Frank Hargrove walked into my office in the spring of 1991. He was 40 years old, well-dressed with the kind of handshake that communicates competence before the conversation starts. He had spent 12 years in commercial real estate and was looking, he said, for something with more substance. What he meant, though, it took me a few years to fully understand it, was that he wanted something he could eventually own a piece of. I gave him a job managing client accounts. Within 18 months, he had doubled our commercial contract volume. He was good at what he did. I want to be precise about that. Frank Hargrove was genuinely good at his work, and the 32 years we built together were not nothing. That matters. It doesn't change what he did later, but it matters. Russell came to see me for the first time in 1997. He was 30 years old and already operating in the particular way of a man who has learned that charm is a more efficient resource than effort. He sat across from my desk, smiled the smile I had known since we were children, and told me he had a business opportunity that needed seed capital, $40,000. He would have it back to me within a year. I gave him $20,000. He paid back $8,000. He came back in 2001, then 2003. Each time the number was larger, the story more elaborate, the timeline for repayment more optimistic. Each time I gave him something less than he asked, more than I should have. Frank told me once with the directness he occasionally deployed, when he thought it served his interests, that I was enabling a pattern that would not end well. He was right. I knew he was right. I gave Russell money anyway because Russell was the only family I had left after Harold and Evelyn passed, and because I understood in a way I had never fully articulated even to myself what it felt like to need something from people who were under no obligation to give it. That understanding cost me a great deal over the years. It also eventually saved Cole. Russell showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening in July 2008 with a 12-year-old boy and a single canvas bag. The boy was thin, quiet, and watching everything with the particular attention of a child who has learned that environments can change without warning. Russell said he needed 2 weeks of business trip, a temporary situation, nothing complicated. I looked at the boy. The boy looked back at me. "What's your name?" I asked. "Cole," he said. "Oh, you hungry, Cole?" He hesitated for exactly 1 second, the hesitation of a child who has been taught that wanting things leads to disappointment, and then said, "Yes, sir." I fed him. I showed him the guest room. I told him to leave his shoes by the door because the floors had just been refinished. Russell was gone before I finished the sentence. I called him 4 times over the next 3 days. He answered once briefly and said he would explain everything when he got back. He did not get back. The calls stopped being answered. The explanation never came. 2 weeks became a month. A month became 3. By October, I had spoken to Maggie Vance about the legal situation and begun the process of understanding what my options were. Frank's reaction when I told him was immediate and practical. "You can't adopt a child," he said. "You're 60 years old and you run a construction supply company. What are you doing?" "I'm 61, I said, "and I'm making sure he doesn't go into the system." "Walt, he stayed," I said. "When Russell left, Cole stayed. That means something." Frank looked at me the way he looked at business decisions he considered irrational, with a kind of controlled frustration that never quite made it to his face but lived around the edges of it. He dropped the subject. He brought it up again twice over the following year and dropped it both times when I didn't engage. What I didn't tell Frank, what I didn't tell anyone at the time, was that the moment Cole had hesitated before answering my question about dinner, I had recognized something I had no right to recognize that quickly. I had seen myself at 4 months old, placed in a house by strangers, watching everything, learning the rules of an environment I hadn't chosen. I had been Harold and Evelyn Mercer's son for 61 years. I knew what it meant to be chosen. I knew what it cost. And I knew standing in my own doorway looking at a 12-year-old boy with a canvas bag and his father's absence behind him, that I was not going to be the next person who left. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't fully understand for another 15 years, was that Russell had not left by accident. He had left by calculation, and the calculation had nothing to do with a business trip. It had to do with a warehouse on Wethersfield Avenue and a fire that happened 4 years earlier and a signature on an insurance policy that I had looked at once in 2004 and not looked at again until March of 2023. But that comes later. The fire started on a Thursday night in October 2004, which I know precisely because I had been reviewing a supply contract at my desk in the warehouse office, and the date was printed at the top of the page. I remember the smell before I saw anything. Not smoke exactly, something sharper underneath it, chemical and deliberate, the kind of smell that doesn't belong in a building full of lumber and dry goods. I had been in enough construction sites over enough years to know the difference between a fire that starts from negligence and a fire that starts from intention. This one announced itself. I got up from my desk. The hallway outside the office was already thick with it, gray-brown, moving fast, the kind of smoke that doesn't give you time to think about what you should have done differently. I made it to the main floor and lost my orientation in about 30 seconds. The layout I had walked 1,000 times became unfamiliar in the dark and the heat, which is something they don't tell you about. Fires that the building you know becomes a building you don't. I went down, not dramatically. I caught a shelving unit with my shoulder on the way to the floor exit and went down hard, and by the time I understood what had happened, I was on my hands and knees on the concrete with the smoke sitting low and heavy around me. Then I heard a voice. Mr. Walt. Small, frightened, coming from somewhere to my left. Mr. Walt, get up. Cole was 8 years old. Russell had brought him to the warehouse that afternoon, one of 3 or 4 times Russell had used the office as an informal meeting point, when he had business nearby and nowhere to leave the boy. Cole had been sitting in the break room with a book when I last checked on him 2 hours before the fire started. He found me on the floor. I don't know how the smoke was thick enough that visibility was measured in feet, but he found me grab my arm with both hands and pulled, with the determined, slightly panicked effort of a child who has decided that failing is not an option. "Come on," he said. "Come on, Mr. Walt." I got up. I don't know if I could have gotten up without him. I have thought about that question for 20 years, and I still don't have a clean answer. What I know is that I did get up, and Cole kept his hand on my arm all the way to the side exit, and we came out into the October night together, coughing eyes streaming alive. Russell arrived 11 minutes after the fire department. He came across the parking lot with his phone in his hand and found us sitting on the tailgate of my truck, Cole wrapped in a blanket one of the firefighters had produced. Russell looked at the building. Half the roof was gone. By then the west wall collapsing inward, and his first question was not about Cole. It was not about me. "Did you call the insurance company?" he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "Not yet," I said. "You need to call them tonight," he said. "The longer you wait, the more complicated it gets." Cole was looking at his father. Not with anger, he was 8, and anger requires a framework that takes years to build, but with the particular attention of a child filing something away for later. I watched him do it. I did not say anything. The fire marshal's report listed the cause as undetermined. That word undetermined had bothered me for years, in the vague way that things bother you when you sense they matter but can't find the thread. The insurance payout was processed without complication through the policy on the warehouse. The managing partner listed as secondary beneficiary on that policy was Frank Hargrove. I had noted that detail at the time. I had not acted on it. Jack Kowalski was a Hartford police detective in 2004. I didn't know him, then we wouldn't meet for 19 years, but his name was on the preliminary incident report that the fire marshal's office had filed, the one I eventually requested a copy of, in March 2023 when I started pulling threads. What Jack told me 19 years later, sitting across from me in my office with a cup of coffee and the particular economy of a man who has learned to say exactly what he means and nothing more, was this. There was accelerant, identified at the point of origin in the back storage room. The sample was logged on a Thursday. By the following Monday, it was no longer in the evidence inventory. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew. It means someone removed it, Jack said. Officially, it means the investigation had no physical evidence to proceed on. Unofficially, he paused. Someone knew where to look and when to look for it. Could you find out who? Jack looked at me the way he always looked at questions he had already answered in his head. I already did, he said. That's why you're paying me. I thought about that conversation now, sitting in the small room behind Maggie's office watching the monitor. Frank was still turning his pen over in his fingers. Russell was leaning slightly toward Gould, saying something behind his hand. 20 years ago, a fire consumed half my warehouse and nearly killed me. An 8-year-old boy pulled me out of it. The same 8-year-old boy was now sitting at the head of that table, 30 minutes away from inheriting everything I had spent a lifetime building. And the man who had ordered the fire was sitting across from him, turning a pen over in his fingers, waiting for the moment he thought he had won. He was going to be waiting a long time. Russell called on a Wednesday afternoon in September 2008. I was in the warehouse office reviewing quarterly numbers when my phone rang. I saw his name on the screen and answered because I always answered, which was one of the things about myself I was still in the process of correcting. I need more time, he said. No greeting, no preamble, just the 5 words delivered with the casual certainty of a man who has never seriously considered the possibility of being told no. How much more time? I asked. Another month, maybe 2. The situation is more complicated than I expected. The situation, I said, is a 12-year-old boy who has been sleeping in my guest room for 6 weeks. He's fine, Walt. You said yourself he's fine. He is fine, I said. That's not the point. I'll call him tonight, Russell said. I just need... Don't call him tonight, I said. Don't call him until you have something real to tell him. There was a pause, then, I'll be in touch. He wasn't. Not for 3 months. Not for 6. When I finally reached him in January 2009 through a number Jack would later confirm was a prepaid phone, he told me he was working on something in Atlanta, that things were almost settled, that Cole was better off where he was for now. I hung up and sat with that phrase for a long time. Better off where he was. I called Maggie Vance that evening. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her best qualities, and when I finished, she asked 2 questions. The first was practical: how long had Cole been in my care without formal documentation? The second was more pointed: what did I want the outcome to be? I want him to stay, I said. Very permanently. Yes. Then we need to start the process, she said. Connecticut requires termination of parental rights before an adoption can proceed. That means either Russell volunteers to surrender them or we petition the court. Given what you've described, we have grounds for abandonment. Will it be complicated? Most things worth doing are, Maggie said. Come in Thursday. I told Cole the following Sunday morning. We were at the kitchen table. He was eating cereal. I was drinking coffee. The radio was on low in the background, the way I kept it on Sunday mornings. I had been trying to find the right moment for 2 weeks and had concluded that there was no right moment, only the moment you decided to stop waiting for one. I want to talk to you about something, I said. He looked up from his bowl. I've been speaking with a lawyer, I said, about making your living here permanent, if that's something you want. He was quiet for a moment. Not the hesitation of uncertainty I had come to know the difference in 8 months between Cole thinking and Cole protecting himself from disappointment. What does permanent mean? He asked. It means I adopt you, I said. Legally, you'd have my name. This would be your home, not temporarily. He looked at his cereal bowl, then out the window, then back at me. What about my dad? He said. Your father would have to agree to give up his legal rights as a parent, I said, or a court would have to make that decision. Would he agree? I thought about Russell on the prepaid phone, telling me Cole was better off where he was. I thought about the parking lot outside the burning warehouse and the first question he had asked. I think he will, I said. Cole nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And then after a pause, thank you. It was the first time he had said those words to me directly, not for a meal or a ride or something borrowed for this. I found I didn't have an immediate response, which was unusual for me. I refilled my coffee and changed the subject, which was the best I could manage. Russell signed the termination papers in March 2010. Maggie had sent them through a process server to an address in Georgia. He signed them, had them notarized, and returned them within 2 weeks. No negotiation, no conditions, no counter-proposal. Just a signature on a line that legally severed him from his son, executed with the same casual efficiency he applied to everything that didn't benefit him directly. I had expected to feel something when I saw the signed documents. Relief, perhaps, or anger, or the particular satisfaction of a bureaucratic process completing itself correctly. What I actually felt was a kind of cold clarity, the understanding that Russell had not abandoned Cole by accident or desperation or circumstance. He had done it because Cole had never been in any real sense something Russell wanted to keep. Frank's response when I told him the adoption was proceeding was a phone call that lasted 4 minutes. You're making a mistake, he said. You've said that. I'm saying it again. You're 62 years old, Walt. You run a construction supply company. A child changes everything. The estate plan, the succession structure, the partnership. The partnership is not your concern, I said. A pause. Everything that affects the company is my concern. Then concern yourself with the quarterly numbers, I said. I'll handle the rest. He hung up before I did, which was unlike him. Frank preferred to be the last one to speak. I noted the departure from pattern and said nothing. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2010. Maggie's office. Cole in a collared shirt he had ironed himself, which I knew because I had watched him do it that morning, with the focused attention he applied to things he wanted to get right. The judge was efficient and not unkind. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Afterward, standing on the courthouse steps in the October sun, Cole looked at the copy of the order Maggie had handed him and read it twice. Cole Mercer, he said, quietly, not to me, just to himself, testing the weight of it. And that's you, I said. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. We went to dinner at a place on Farmington Avenue he had mentioned once in passing 3 months earlier, which he did not realize I had remembered. He ordered the same thing he always ordered, and we talked about the upcoming football season, and a project I had at the company, and nothing of particular consequence, which was exactly right. I had been chosen once at 4 months old by 2 people who owed me nothing. I understood sitting across from Cole at that table that I had just done the same thing. What I did not understand yet, what would take me another 13 years to fully see, was that Russell had watched all of it, had calculated all of it, and had decided somewhere in the space between signing those papers and disappearing to Atlanta that what he had given up was not a son. It was a claim, one he intended to make again, on his own terms. Dr. Howard Crane had the particular quality of a man who delivered bad news without apology, which I respected. He was not cruel about it. He simply understood, in the way that good doctors eventually do, that softening a prognosis does not change it. It only delays the conversation the patient needs to have with themselves. He sat across from me in his office on a Tuesday morning in January 2023, set a folder of test results on the desk between us, and told me what my heart had been doing for the past 18 months without my knowledge or permission. The technical terms were precise and not particularly relevant to this story. What mattered was the summary: significant deterioration in cardiac function, progressive not reversible through medication alone. Surgical intervention was possible, a valve replacement complex, but not unprecedented for a man my age and general condition. Without it, Dr. Crane estimated 18 to 24 months of functional health before the deterioration became something else. With surgery, I asked. It's 5 to 8 years of good quality, he said. Possibly more. The procedure has strong outcomes at your age when the patient is otherwise healthy. And the recovery. has 6 to 8 weeks of restricted activity, 3 to 4 months before you're fully operational. I looked at the folder on his desk. I thought about the warehouse on Wethersfield Avenue and Frank Hargrove's signature on an insurance policy and a prepaid phone in Atlanta, and a 12-year-old boy who had grown into a 29-year-old man who did not yet know what was coming for him. "I'm not going to have the surgery," I said. Dr. Crane looked at me the way doctors look at patients who have made decisions the doctor disagrees with but recognizes as the patient's to make. "May I ask why?" "There are things I need to finish," I said. "The recovery window creates a problem." "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "the recovery window is 3 to 4 months. The alternative is—" "I understand the alternative," I said. "I need 18 months. The surgery gives me 3 to 4 of restricted activity, followed by 5 to 8 years of not having finished what I started. The math doesn't work for me right now." He was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me you're choosing a shorter timeline in order to accomplish something within it." "I'm telling you I have work to do," I said, "and I'd appreciate your help managing the symptoms while I do it." He prescribed 3 medication scheduled monthly monitoring appointments and told me to reduce red meat and alcohol, and stressed the last of which, he said, with the faint tone of a man who understood it was the least actionable item on the list. I thanked him, shook his hand, and drove home. I told Cole and Natalie that evening. They came for dinner, a Tuesday habit we had maintained for 6 years, one of the structures Cole had built into his week, without being asked and never commented on. Natalie made coffee after the meal. Cole was talking about a supply chain issue he was managing at the company. I waited for a natural pause. "I have something to tell you both," I said. The pause extended. I told them what Dr. Crane had told me. I told them about the timeline, the medication, the decision about surgery. I told them clearly and without ornamentation the way I had been told. Cole was quiet for a long time. Natalie set her coffee mug down, carefully the way you set something down when you need your hands free to think. "The surgery," Cole said finally. "Dr. Crane said it could give you 5 to 8 years. He did. And then why? Because 3 to 4 months of recovery is 3 to 4 months I don't have," I said. "For what?" Cole asked. His voice was controlled. I could see what it was costing him. "There are things I need to handle," I said. "Things I should have handled years ago and didn't. I'm not going to go into detail tonight because I don't have all the pieces in place yet, but I need you to trust me." "Walt," he leaned forward. "You're talking about trading years of your life for—" "I'm talking about protecting what we've built," I said. "Both of us. Everything you're going to inherit, everything I've spent 30 years constructing there, are people who intend to take it. I have known this for a while. I have not moved fast enough. The diagnosis changes that." Natalie was watching me. She had the look she sometimes had, the particular focus of someone assembling information faster than the conversation was providing it. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Not about the diagnosis, about the other thing." "Long enough," I said. "Too long." Cole sat back. He looked at the table. He looked at me. The particular quality of his silence in that moment, not anger, not despair, but the focused stillness of a man recalibrating, was one of the things I had always admired most about him. He did not perform his feelings. He processed them. "What do you need from us?" he said. "Right now, nothing. I need to make some calls and set some things in motion." I paused. "Eventually, I'll need you to trust a process without knowing all of it, and I'll need Natalie's help with some financial arrangements." Natalie nodded once. "Tell me when." "Soon," I said. We finished the evening the way we finish most evenings, talking about things of no particular consequence, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing in the space around the extraordinary thing we had just discussed. That was how Cole and Natalie handled difficulty. They did not let it consume the room. I had always found that quality in them to be one of the better arguments for the kind of family you choose rather than the kind you're assigned. After they left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Maggie Vance. It was 9:47 in the evening. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been expecting the call or something like it. Maggie had a gift for anticipating the shape of things before they fully arrived. "I need to see you," I said. "Thursday if you have it." "I have Thursday morning," she said. 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock, I said. "And Maggie, I need you to clear the rest of the morning. This is going to take a while." A brief pause. "Should I be concerned?" "No," I said. "You should be interested. I'm going to tell you about a trap I've been building in my head for 6 years, and now I need to build it in reality." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll make coffee." I hung up and looked at the kitchen wall for a while longer. 18 months, give or take. It was enough. It was going to have to be. I have always believed that the best kind of trap is the one that looks like an opportunity. Not a cage, not a wall, an open door well lit, clearly marked, positioned exactly where the person walking toward it expects an open door to be. The genius of a good trap is not the mechanism. It is the architecture of expectation. You build the world, your target believes they are walking through, and then you build the floor beneath it. I had been designing this particular trap for 6 years. What the diagnosis gave me was a deadline. I called Jack Kowalski in March 2023. He came to my office on a Wednesday morning, a compact man in his early 50s with the kind of stillness that comes from spending 20 years watching people who didn't know they were being watched. He had left the Hartford Police Department in 2014 and set up a private practice that, from what I had been able to gather, operated with the same methodical precision as his time on the force. He was not cheap. He was not talkative. He was exactly what I needed. "I need surveillance on 2 people," I said. "Consistent, documented, legally airtight." "It names," he said. "Russell Mercer, my brother." I paused. "And Frank Hargrove, my business partner." Jack did not react to either name. He took out a small notebook and wrote them down. "What am I looking for?" "Communication between them," I said. "Meetings, shared contacts, financial transactions if you can get to them legally. I want to know if they're coordinating and what the coordination looks like. Reason to suspect they are." I told him about the 2004 fire. I told him about the insurance policy. I told him about the evidence that had disappeared from the marshal's inventory before the investigation could proceed. I told him about Russell's pattern of requests and disappearances and the particular timing of Cole's abandonment relative to everything else. Jack listened without interrupting. He had the quality of a good listener, not passive but active, the kind of listening that is really a form of building. "That's a long time to sit on something," he said when I finished. "I didn't have confirmation," I said. "I had pattern recognition. I need confirmation." "Understood." He put the notebook away. "I'll need a retainer and a list of known addresses and vehicles." "Maggie has the retainer ready," I said. "The list is in that envelope." He picked up the envelope, looked at it without opening it, and stood. "I'll be in touch in 30 days. He was in touch in 22. By April, Jack had documented 11 meetings between Russell and Frank restaurants' parking lots, twice at a golf club in Glastonbury, that neither of them had any obvious reason to be members of. The pattern was clear. They were not running into each other. They were organizing. By May, Jack had identified a third name in the communications network, a lawyer in New Haven, not Patrick Gould that came later, who had done work for Frank on 2 previous real estate transactions, and appeared to be advising on something that Jack described in his characteristically precise language as estate-related legal strategy. I read Jack's May report on a Thursday evening and called Natalie the following morning. Natalie was 25 years old, which made her younger than Cole by 4 years, and considerably more fluent in financial architecture than either of us had ever advertised. She had a degree in accounting from the University of Connecticut, and a mind that moved through numbers the way some people move through rooms quickly without bumping into things. Cole knew she was sharp. He did not yet know quite how sharp, because Natalie had the quality of capable people who see no reason to perform their capabilities until performance is required. "I need you to set up a holding company in Delaware," I told her. "Clean registration, no connection to Mercer Construction Supply or to me personally. It needs to be operational within 60 days. A pause. "Purpose?" "Debt acquisition," I said. Another pause. Longer. "Whose debt?" "Russell's." I heard her think. That was something I had always found remarkable about Natalie. You could hear her thinking, not because she was loud, but because the quality of her silence changed when she was processing something significant. "At how much?" she said. "Approximately $2 million across 4 creditors," I said. "The largest single holder is a man named Tony Delgado. I'll give you his contact information. I want the purchases made at a discount 65 to 70 cents on the dollar, and I want them completed before September." "Does Cole know about this?" "Not yet," I said. "He will. Walt." Her voice was careful. "If Russell finds out his debt has been purchased by an entity connected to you, and that's why it can't be connected to me," I said. "Not yet. Russell needs to keep believing his creditors are arm's-length commercial relationships. The moment he understands what's happened, the leverage disappears. She was quiet for a moment. You're not just building a legal case, she said. You're building a situation where Russell has no options left by the time he realizes he has no options. Yes, I said. She paused. That's very thorough. Thank you, I said. The Delaware Holding Company was registered in June under a name that contained no reference to Mercer Hartford or construction. Natalie handled the paperwork with the efficient invisibility of someone who understood exactly why each step needed to be taken exactly as it was being taken. By July, she had purchased Russell's debt from 3 of the 4 creditors at an average of 68 cents on the dollar. Tony Delgado was the last and largest. Delgado was practical about it. He had been carrying Russell's debt for 3 years and had concluded with the pragmatism of a man who had been in the business of lending money to unreliable people for long enough to develop accurate instincts that the full recovery was unlikely. He sold at 66 cents without significant negotiation. By August, the Mercer family trust, through the Delaware Holding Company, through 2 layers of clean documentation, owned every dollar Russell Mercer owed to anyone. Russell did not know. Russell, at that point, was busy with his own construction project. Jack's August report included photographs from a meeting at a restaurant in Glastonbury. Russell and Frank, at a corner table, a third man I didn't recognize, documents spread between them. Jack had obtained a partial audio intercept, through legal means, a consensual recording from a source he declined to name at that stage that included enough to confirm what I had suspected. They had found a lawyer, a real one this time. They were planning to contest the will. I read the August report twice, set it on my desk, and allowed myself a moment of something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same neighborhood. Russell thought he was building a case against me. What he was actually building was a cell, and he was building it himself, one careful brick at a time, using materials I had been quietly supplying for months. In August, I received 19 applications for the position of executive assistant. 18 of them were standard. Solid resumes, appropriate experience, the kind of candidates who would have done the job competently and given me no reason to think about them twice. I interviewed 6, made polite notes, and set the folders aside. The 19th application came in on a Thursday, 3 days after the posting closed, with a brief cover letter that apologized for the late submission and did not explain it. The resume listed 7 years of executive support experience across 3 companies, 2 of which I recognized. The third I did not. I called Jack that evening. That's Sandra Webb, I said. Currently applying for a position at my company. I need a background check within 48 hours. Standard or deep? Deep, I said, particularly anything connecting her to Frank Hargrove. Jack called back in 36 hours. He had the quality of a man who treated deadlines as minimums rather than targets. She worked for Hargrove, he said. Not directly, through a consulting arrangement. 18 months ended last year. The arrangement was structured through a shell entity that Hargrove uses for off-book personnel expenses. The payments are documented if you know where to look. Does she know I'd know where to look? I doubt it, Jack said. She's good, but she's operating on the assumption that her connection to Hargrove is adequately buried. It isn't. On those, Jack said. It isn't. I scheduled Sandra Webb's interview for the following Tuesday. She arrived 4 minutes early, which told me she was disciplined but not performatively so. She was 34 years old, composed with the particular alertness of someone who was paying attention to more than the immediate conversation. She sat across from my desk, set her bag on the floor rather than her lap, the gesture of someone comfortable in professional environments, and answered my questions with the clean economy of a person who had prepared thoroughly and was not going to oversell it. She was good. I want to be clear about that. Whatever Frank had paid her to do, Sandra Webb was genuinely qualified for the position she was applying for. The 2 things were not mutually exclusive. Toward the end of the interview, I asked her why she had left her previous position. "Oh, the work stopped being interesting," she said. "What made it interesting before it stopped?" She considered the question for a moment, not performing consideration, actually doing it. "Access," she said. "Being close enough to the decision-making that you understand the shape of what's happening, not just executing tasks. And you think this position offers that?" "I think you're someone who makes decisions worth being close to," she said. "Whether you give me access to them is your choice. I'm telling you what I find interesting." It was a good answer, honest in the ways that served her, and careful about the ways that didn't. I hired her on a Thursday and asked her to start the following Monday. I called Jack from my car in the parking garage. I'm hiring her, I said. A pause. You're hiring Frank's asset. I'm hiring Frank's asset, I confirmed. And I need you to set up a consent monitoring arrangement before she starts. I want documentation of everything she accesses, copies, or transmits. All of it legally obtained, all of it time-stamped. Yeah, she'll need to sign a consent form as part of onboarding, Jack said. Standard IT monitoring disclosure. Most people don't read them carefully. Make sure ours is thorough, I said. I want the consent to be real, and I want the documentation to be airtight. Understood. And the information she sends to Hargrove? And let it go, I said. For now, I want Frank to believe he has a functioning channel into my operation, a channel I control. Jack was quiet for a moment. You're going to feed him information. Selectively, I said. Yes. I spent the following 2 weeks watching Sandra work. She was efficient, organized, and subtle, the subtlety of someone who had been trained to gather information without appearing to gather it. She went through the motions of a new employee learning a new environment while doing something slightly more than that, and she did it well enough that anyone not specifically looking for it would not have seen it. I was specifically looking for it. I placed the first piece of bait in her 3rd week. A copy of what appeared to be my current, well, not the real document which Maggie held in a sealed file, but a plausible version that listed the estate distribution in terms Frank would find encouraging. I left it in a folder on my desk during a meeting I stepped out of. Sandra had 11 minutes alone in the office. When I returned, the folder was precisely where I had left it. The next morning, Jack sent me a screenshot. The document had been photographed and transmitted to an email address associated with Frank Hargrove's personal account. The second piece of bait was a memo, an internal note about a meeting with a financial advisor containing figures that suggested the company's liquid assets were significantly lower than they actually were. I left it in the printer tray on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday evening, it had been transmitted. The third was a USB drive. I left it on my desk on a Thursday morning, labeled with a strip of tape that said, Estate Draft. I went to a meeting that ran 2 hours. When I returned, the drive was in exactly the same position, the same angle, the tape undisturbed. I called Jack. The drive ate, I said. Did she copy it? She plugged it in at 10:47, he said. Spent 4 minutes with it. Copied the contents to a personal device and returned it. Guess good, Mike said. What was on it? A document that describes in convincing detail an estate plan that leaves Russell and Frank well provided for, I said. Generous distributions, no unusual clauses, nothing to trigger concern. Jack was quiet for a moment. So Frank thinks he knows what the will says. And Frank thinks he knows exactly what the will says, I said. He's been reading my mail for 8 weeks, and every piece of it has told him the same story. He's going to walk into that conference room in 13 months, believing he has a complete picture. And the picture is wrong. The picture, I said, is a set I built for him. Every prop is in place. Every sightline is controlled. The only thing Frank doesn't know is that the theater belongs to me. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Sandra was at her desk in the outer office, working through the afternoon's correspondence with the focused efficiency she applied to everything. She was in the technical sense still Frank's asset reporting, transmitting feeding information back through the channel Frank believed he controlled. What she was actually doing without knowing it was building Frank's confidence in a fiction I had written specifically for him. Every document she sent was a brick. Every brick made the walls higher. And Frank standing inside those walls, looking at the sky I had painted for him, was becoming more certain by the week that he understood exactly what was coming. He did not understand anything. Maggie Vance had known me for 26 years. In that time, she had reviewed 4 partnership agreements, 2 property acquisitions, 1 contentious contractor dispute that came within a week of litigation before settling, and the adoption of a 12-year-old boy whose father had left him on my doorstep and driven away. She had seen me make good decisions and poor ones, and she had the quality of a trusted lawyer who tells you the difference without editorializing about it. I had never lied to her. I had on occasion withheld things. There is a distinction, and it matters. I called her on a Thursday morning in September 2023 and told her I needed an appointment that was not on the books. No secretary, no file entry, no digital record of the meeting request. She was quiet for a moment and then said she had a cancellation Friday at 2. I arrived with a manila envelope and a question I had been working toward for 30 years. She closed the office door, sat across from me, and folded her hands on the desk, in the way she did when she was ready to receive something she understood would require her full attention. "There are two things I need to add to the estate file," I said. "The first is straightforward, the second is not." "Start with the straightforward one," she said. I set the manila envelope on the desk. In February of 1994, I underwent a voluntary vasectomy at Hartford General Hospital. The procedure was performed by Dr. Raymond Elias, witnessed by 2 attending nurses, and documented in my medical record. I have obtained a certified copy of that record. I pushed the envelope toward her. "I need it filed as a sealed probate exhibit. In the event that anyone attempts to claim biological parentage between me and a child born after February 1994, that document ends the conversation before it begins." Maggie opened the envelope and looked at the contents without touching them. She was quiet for a moment. "You're anticipating a paternity claim." "I am." "From whom?" "Someone who doesn't exist yet," I said. "Or someone who does exist, but whose connection to me will be fabricated. I don't have the specific shape of it yet. Jack is still working on that piece. But Frank has been coordinating with Russell for 6 months, and at least one of the things they have discussed involves a third party I haven't fully identified. A paternity claim is consistent with the strategy." Maggie looked at the document again. "A child claimed to be yours. A child claimed to be mine," I confirmed. "Born after a date when I could not have fathered one. Filed as a sealed exhibit under Connecticut General Statutes, this record eliminates that claim in under 5 minutes at any probate proceeding." She set the envelope down and made a note. "I'll have it filed by end of next week, sealed, indexed, accessible only under court order or at the reading." She looked up. "You said there were 2 things." "Yes," I said. I had driven to Maggie's office that morning, thinking about Harold Mercer. Not for the first time, Harold had been somewhere in my thinking for most of my adult life. The way the things that shape you earliest tend to stay in the peripheral vision, but with a particular clarity that had been building for several weeks. Harold Mercer had adopted me in 1961. He had given me his name without ceremony, without condition, and without ever, in 30 years of fatherhood, behaving as though the giving required acknowledgement. I had been his son. That was the entirety of his position on the matter. Russell was Harold's biological son. 2 years younger than me, raised in the same house, given the same name by blood rather than by choice. I had spent 60 years understanding what that distinction meant to Russell, and pretending in the interest of family peace that it didn't mean what it meant. I was done pretending. "I was adopted," I said. "Harold and Evelyn Mercer took me in at 4 months old through the county welfare office. Russell is their biological child. I have the original adoption records. Harold kept them in a file box in the basement, and I found them after he died." I paused. "I've never told anyone. Not Frank, not a lawyer, not anyone." Maggie looked at me, the way she looked at things she was deciding how to handle. Not surprised, Maggie was rarely surprised, but recalibrating. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. "Because it's relevant," I said. "If Russell's lawyers try to argue blood claim, if they try to establish that, as Harold Mercer's biological son, he has a prior or superior standing in the estate, I need this on record. The adoption was legal, properly documented, and finalized before Russell was born. My standing as a Mercer is identical to his. More than identical, because mine came with paperwork." A pause. "And the other reason?" I looked at the framed photograph on the shelf behind her desk. She had kept it there for as long as I could remember, her parents, her brother, a beach somewhere in Maine. The particular arrangement of people who belong to each other. "Because Cole is about to find out," I said. "And I would rather he find out from me in my own words at a moment I've chosen, not from a court filing or an opposing attorney or a piece of paper that surfaces without context." I paused. "I'm going to write him a letter. Maggie, I need you to hold it and give it to him after the reading." She was quiet for a long moment. "You've been carrying this for 60 years, she said. "I've been carrying it for 60 years, I said. "But it stopped being a burden somewhere around 2010. The night I sat across from Cole at a table on Farmington Avenue and watched him say his own name like he was trying it on for the first time." I paused. "I understood something that night that I hadn't been able to articulate before, that the thing Harold gave me, being chosen, being kept, being someone's regardless of the paperwork, was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given me, and that I had given it to Cole, and that Russell, for all his biological claim to the Mercer name, had never understood what the name actually meant." Maggie looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. "I'll draft the sealed exhibit order today," she said, "and I'll create a separate file for the letter. No case number, no index, just your name and Cole's." She made a note. "Is there anything else?" "Not today," I said. She walked me to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "Walt," she said. I turned. "And Harold would have approved," she said, "of all of it." I thought about that for the drive home, about Harold Mercer in his basement, keeping a file box with my adoption records because it had not occurred to him to hide them or discard them, because they were simply a part of the family's history, and he had treated the family's history as something worth preserving. I thought about the letter I had not yet written. I thought about Cole reading it. I thought he's going to understand. I don't know exactly when or exactly which part will reach him first, but he's going to understand. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Jack sent his October report on a Monday morning, which was unusual. He typically delivered reports on Thursdays, a rhythm we had established in the first month of our arrangement and maintained without discussion, the way two people who work well together establish patterns without needing to name them. A Monday delivery meant something had moved faster than expected. I read it at my desk before Sandra arrived. The report was 41 pages. I read all of it. The core of it was this: Russell and Frank had moved from coordination to consolidation. The 11 documented meetings Jack had cataloged through September had produced by October something that looked less like two men discussing a shared interest and more like two men executing a shared plan. The restaurant in Glastonbury had become their primary meeting point, corner table, cash payments, a booth positioned away from the room's sightlines in the particular way of people who understood they were doing something they would prefer not to explain. Jack had obtained a partial transcript from a consensual source he was still not naming the source, which I respected, covering approximately 40 minutes of a meeting on the 14th of October. I read the transcript 3 times. Russell's opening position was direct. He told Frank that he had documentation, financial records, internal communications. A paper trail that Jack later confirmed was related to a series of transactions Frank had run through the company in 2018 and 2019 that did not survive scrutiny. Russell had found it or had paid someone to find it, and he was using it the way a man uses leverage when he has nothing else left to negotiate with. "You help me," Russell said, according to the transcript, "and this stays where it is. You don't, and I have a conversation with the DA's office that neither of us wants." Frank's response, stripped of the careful language he had wrapped it in, was capitulation. He agreed. He had conditions: his name had to be protected. The strategy had to be legally defensible on its surface. He wanted his equity claim structured through a third party, but the agreement was clear. They were moving together. The strategy they had settled on had 3 components. The first was a mental competency challenge. Frank would provide testimony supported by 2 doctors he had identified through a contact at a private psychiatric practice in New Haven that my recent behavior had shown signs of cognitive decline. Erratic decision-making, unusual financial transactions, undue susceptibility to influence. The goal was not to win the challenge outright, but to create enough procedural uncertainty to delay the estate proceedings and force a settlement. The second component was Cole. Specifically, undue influence, the argument that Cole, as the primary beneficiary and the person with the most consistent access to me in my final years, had manipulated my decision-making in ways that compromised the integrity of the will. It was a standard argument in contested estate cases, Jack noted in his summary, and difficult to disprove without clear documentation of independent intent. The third component was the one that stopped me: a child. Russell had found a woman, a Laura Novak, 31 years old, Hartford address, who had a 10-year-old son named Oliver. Jack's preliminary research indicated that Oliver's birth certificate listed the father as unknown. Russell's plan, as best Jack could reconstruct it from the partial transcript and subsequent surveillance, was to present Oliver as my biological child, a previously unknown heir whose existence would complicate the estate distribution and create grounds for a substantial settlement. I set the report down. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Jack. "The child," I said. "Oliver Novak. Who is his father?" "Working on it," Jack said. "The birth certificate lists unknown, but that's a legal designation, not necessarily an accurate one. I've requested the hospital records through a legal channel. It'll take 2 to 3 weeks." "What's your read?" I said. A pause. Jack did not offer reads without being asked. When he was asked, he was precise. The woman Laura Novak has had documented contact with Russell Mercer going back to 2012, he said. 2 years before the child was born, the contact appears to have been personal rather than professional. There's a gap in documented communication between 2014 and 2022, which could mean a clean break, or could mean they moved to channels I haven't accessed yet. You think Russell is the father? I said. I think the timeline is consistent with it, Jack said. And I think if Russell is asking this woman to present her son as your biological child, he has a specific reason to believe the request won't be refused. Words, I said. Or dependency, Jack said. Sometimes they look the same. I hung up and looked at the window for a while. What Russell had constructed the competency challenge, the undue influence argument, the fabricated heir was, I had to admit, not unintelligent. Each component addressed a different vulnerability in a standard estate proceeding. Together, they created a multi-front legal problem that would be expensive and time-consuming to defend against, which was the point. Not necessarily to win, but to exhaust. To create enough noise and delay that a settlement became the path of least resistance. It would have worked against most people. It was not going to work against me, but not for the reasons Russell thought. Jack sent a follow-up report 3 weeks later. Oliver Novak's hospital records had been obtained. The records listed the attending physician's notes from the birth, which included a paternity acknowledgement form that had been filled out, signed, and then, according to the hospital's administrative record, subsequently withdrawn and replaced with the unknown designation. The original form had been signed by Russell Mercer. I called Jack immediately. He's the father, I said. He's the father, Jack confirmed. And he withdrew the acknowledgement 6 weeks after the birth, which means he's been legally unacknowledged for 10 years while the child has been living 40 minutes from his house. I thought about Oliver, 10 years old. His father's jawline, according to the photograph Jack had included in the report. Sitting in a house in Hartford, growing up with a blank space on a form where a name should have been, because his father had decided that the acknowledgement was inconvenient. I thought about a 12-year-old boy with a canvas bag on my doorstep. It's the woman, I said. Laura Novak. What do you know about her? Single mother, Jack said. Works 2 jobs, no criminal record, no significant financial assets. She's been managing on her own since the acknowledgement was withdrawn. A pause. She's not a bad person, Walt. She's a person in a difficult position who Russell has been cultivating for a specific purpose. I know, I said. That's why I'm going to talk to her before Russell gets to use her. Jack was quiet for a moment. That's a delicate conversation. Yes, I said. It is. I paused. But I've been having delicate conversations for 60 years. I think I can manage one more. I set the report down and looked at the ceiling. Russell had spent the better part of a year assembling his pieces. Frank's testimony, Cole's influence argument, a fabricated heir, a lawyer who would file motions with enough conviction to slow everything down. He had done it carefully, methodically, with the focused energy of a man who believed he was building something real. What he had actually built was a case study in the danger of moving against someone who had been watching you move. Every piece Russell had positioned I had already accounted for, except one. Laura Novak had not chosen any of this, and Oliver Novak, 10 years old with his father's jawline and a blank space on a form, had chosen none of it at all. That was the piece I was going to handle differently. We're halfway through and Walt's trap is almost fully built. Every piece is in place. Every player is exactly where he needs them to be. Before I continue, drop "still here" in the comments so I know you're still with me. I read every single one, and it genuinely means a lot. Just a note before we go further, some elements of this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes and may not reflect any specific events. If that's not the kind of content you're here for, it's completely okay to step away. Now, no hard feelings at all. I chose a coffee shop on Asylum Avenue for the meeting, not because it was convenient. It was 20 minutes from my office and required parking in a garage I disliked, but because it was the kind of place where 2 people could have a serious conversation without attracting attention. Busy enough to provide cover, loud enough that adjacent tables couldn't follow a quiet exchange, anonymous enough that neither of us would run into anyone we knew. I arrived first. I always arrive first. It was a habit Harold had instilled in me. Without meaning to, he had believed that arriving early was a form of respect, that it told the other person their time mattered to you before they had said a word. I had kept the habit long after I'd forgotten where I learned it. Laura Novak came through the door at 9:58. She was 31 years old, dressed for a workday she had taken personal leave from, with the particular composure of a woman who had been managing difficult situations alone for long enough that composure had become her default setting. She saw me immediately. I had described myself accurately on the phone, which I considered the minimum standard for a meeting of this kind, and crossed the room without hesitating. She sat down. She did not order anything. She looked at me directly. "You said it was about Oliver," she said. "It is," I said, "and about Russell." Something moved in her face at his name. Not surprised she had known from the moment I called that the two were connected. More like the particular steadying of a person who has been expecting a conversation and has been dreading it. "How do you know Russell?" she asked. "He's my brother," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You're Walter Mercer." "Yes." She picked up the coffee menu, looked at it without reading it, and set it back down. It was the gesture of a person buying themselves 3 seconds. I waited. "What do you want?" she said. I set the folder on the table between us. Not aggressively, I placed it in the center, equidistant the way you place something when you want it understood as information rather than threat. "I want you to know what Russell is planning," I said. "And then I want to give you a choice." She looked at the folder. "What's in it?" "Jack Kowalski's surveillance report, covering Russell's activities from March through December of last year," I said. "The section relevant to you begins on page 14. There's also a copy of Oliver's original birth certificate, the one Russell signed and then withdrew, and a legal summary of the estate strategy he has been developing with a former business partner of mine." She did not reach for the folder immediately. She looked at me. "The strategy," I said, "involves presenting Oliver as my biological child, an unknown heir. The goal is to complicate my estate proceedings sufficiently that my primary beneficiary, my adopted son Cole, is forced into a settlement that redistributes a significant portion of the estate." I paused. "Russell would need you to testify that Oliver is my child. He would need Oliver to appear at the proceedings. He has been, from what my investigator has documented, cultivating your trust and your financial dependency for approximately 18 months in preparation for making this request." Laura was very still. "He told me it was a business matter," she said, quietly, "that there was money in it for Oliver, for both of us." "There is money in it," I said. "For Russell. Whatever he promised you is a fraction of what he intends to recover. And when the proceedings are over, however they end, you and Oliver become liabilities rather than assets. That's not speculation. That's the pattern of how Russell operates. I've watched it for 30 years. She reached for the folder. She read page 14, then 15, then went back and read 14 again. Her breathing was even and controlled the breathing of a woman managing something that wanted to come out differently. When she got to the section with Oliver's original birth certificate, the one with Russell's signature, dated April 2014, and the withdrawal notice dated June of the same year, she stopped. She set the folder down. She looked at the window for a moment. Outside Asylum Avenue was doing its ordinary morning business. Cars, pedestrians, a delivery truck blocking the right lane. The world entirely indifferent to what was happening at a corner table in a coffee shop. "He signed it," she said. "Then he took it back." "And 6 weeks after Oliver was born," I said. "Yes." "He told me he was protecting us," she said. "That having his name on the record would complicate things. That it was better this way." She paused. "I was 21. I believed him. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say." "What do you want from me?" she asked again. Her voice was different now, not guarded, not performing composure, just tired in the particular way of a person who has been carrying something heavier than they let on. "2 things," I said. "First, I want to offer Oliver a trust fund, irrevocable, administered by Maggie Vance, funded at the time of my estate's settlement, enough to cover his education and provide a foundation for whatever comes after. It doesn't require you to do anything, and it doesn't require anything from Oliver. It exists regardless of what you decide about the rest." She looked at me. "Why?" "Because Oliver didn't choose any of this," I said. "He didn't choose his father, and he didn't choose what his father intends to use him for. He deserves something that isn't contingent on the decisions of people who have been making poor ones on his behalf for 10 years. She was quiet for a moment. "And the second thing? I want you to come to the will reading," I said. "When it happens. I want you to sit in that room and tell the truth. Not a version of it, not a managed version, the truth. That Russell is Oliver's father. That Russell asked you to misrepresent that. That you declined." He'll know it was me, she said. Yes, I said, he will. And Oliver. What does Oliver? Oliver doesn't need to be there, I said. This is between adults who made decisions. He didn't make any of them. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at the folder, then at me, then at the window again. If I do this, she said carefully, what happens to Russell? Chorale. Russell loses, I said. Legally, financially, completely. What happens to him after that depends on decisions other people make, but he loses the proceedings. And if I don't? I looked at her directly. Then Russell uses Oliver the way he uses everything as a means to an end. And when he's done using him, Oliver is left with a father who never acknowledged him, and a story that, when he's old enough to understand it, is going to be very difficult to explain. The coffee shop continued around us. A barista called out an order. 2 women at a nearby table laughed at something on a phone. The ordinary world doing what it always did. Laura Novak looked at me for a long time. Tell me what I need to do, she said. I told her. Clearly, specifically, step by step. Maggie would contact her with the trust documentation. Jack would take her statement. She would receive notification of the reading date through Maggie's office. She would arrive, sit, and tell the truth when asked. That was all. She nodded once when I finished. She picked up the folder, put it in her bag, and stood. Mr. Mercer, she said. Walt, I said. She paused. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the particular acknowledgement of 2 people who have recognized each other across a difficult situation. Walt, she said, whatever Russell thinks he built, I hope it falls apart completely. It will, I said. She left. I finished my coffee. Outside, the delivery truck had cleared the right lane. Traffic was moving again. I sat there for a few minutes longer, thinking about Oliver with his father's jawline, and the blank space on a form, and about the trust document Maggie would draw up, and about the particular stubbornness of doing the right thing for a child who would never know you had done it. Then I drove back to the office. There was still work to do. By February, the trap had a shape. Not a finished shape, there were still moving parts, still pieces that depended on other people doing what I expected them to do, which is always the riskiest element of any plan that involves human beings. But the architecture was sound. The foundation was in place. What remained was documentation, and documentation was something Maggie Vance did better than anyone I had ever known. I spent 3 Thursdays in February and March at her office. The first Thursday was the video deposition. Maggie had arranged 2 independent psychiatrists, Dr. Patricia Osei from the University of Connecticut Medical Center, and Dr. Leonard Marsh from Hartford Hospital, neither of whom had any prior professional relationship with me, both of whom held active certifications in forensic psychiatry. The purpose was straightforward: to establish on the record that I was of sound mind and full cognitive capacity at the time of signing the will and all associated documents. The session lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. They asked me about dates, names, financial figures, the history of Mercer construction, supply the sequence of my estate planning decisions, and the reasoning behind each one. I answered all of it. I made 2 small errors, a date I misremembered by a month. A contractor's name I confused with another, and I corrected both of them immediately, which Dr. Osei later told Maggie was itself diagnostically relevant. A person with genuine cognitive impairment, she noted, typically does not self-correct. Maggie had the session filmed, notarized, and filed as a sealed exhibit. Afterwards, sitting in her conference room, with the cameras off and the psychiatrists gone, she poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me. If Frank's doctors are going to have a difficult time arguing impairment against 2 board-certified forensic psychiatrists and 90 minutes of video evidence, she said. If Frank's doctors, I said, are going to have a difficult time arguing anything once the rest of the file is open. She allowed herself a small smile. You've built quite a file. I've had time, I said, and motivation. How are you feeling? She asked. Not about the file. Tired, I said, but functional. Crane says the medication is managing the deterioration. I have margin. She nodded. Then let's talk about the clause. The in terrorem clause, sometimes called a no contest clause, was in Maggie's measured description the sharpest instrument in the document. Under the in terrorem clause in my will, any beneficiary who contests the will, or who initiates, supports, or materially participates in a legal challenge without probable cause, risks forfeiting all rights and bequests under that will. The forfeiture provision is triggered the moment they file a challenge without probable cause, Maggie said. Not after months of litigation, not after they lose. If Russell Frank or anyone acting on their behalf contests the will without a legitimate basis, they risk forfeiting whatever the document allocated to them. And what does it allocate to Russell? I said. $1, she said, as specified. So he files a challenge, I said, forfeits $1, and loses the challenge on the merits. Though that is the intended sequence, yes. Beautiful, I said. Maggie looked at me over the rim of her water glass. You enjoy this more than is strictly necessary. I've spent 18 months building it, I said. I'm allowed a small amount of enjoyment. She made a note. The clause is already drafted. I want to walk you through the full document on the third Thursday, all exhibits, all transfers, the trust structure for Oliver the Scholarship Fund authorization. I want you to have read every page before you sign anything. I will. Walt. She looked up from the folder. When this is over, when the reading is done and the transfers are complete, what do you do? I thought about that. I go back to work, I said. Cole will be running the company. I'll be in the way more than I'm useful, but I'd like to be in the way for a while longer. She smiled at that. A real one, not the controlled professional version. The third Thursday I read every page. 47 pages of the primary will. 11 pages of trust documentation for Oliver, the sealed exhibits. The vasectomy record, the adoption papers, Jack's surveillance reports, the USB drive index, the psychiatric deposition summary, Laura's sworn statement, Dennis Rourke's affidavit about the 2004 fire, the scholarship fund authorization naming Hartford Community College as administrator, the in terrorem clause clearly stated impossible to misread. I read all of it, then I signed where Maggie indicated, initialed where she indicated, and watched her seal each document in the particular methodical way she had of treating paperwork as something that deserved to be taken seriously. When it was done, she collected the folders and set them in the file cabinet behind her desk. She locked it with a key she kept on a chain that never left her person during business hours. I had seen that chain for 26 years and had never thought much about it. That afternoon I found it oddly reassuring. It's done, she said. Almost, I said. She looked at me. What's left? I stood, put on my jacket, and picked up my bag. Something that isn't in any of those folders, I said. Something I still need to write. She understood from the way I said it that I was not talking about a legal document. Take your time with it, she said. I will, I said, but not too much time. I drove home through the March afternoon thinking about a letter and the person who would read it. Everything else was ready. This was the last piece. And unlike everything else I had built over the past 18 months, the surveillance reports, the sealed exhibits, the legal clauses, this one had no mechanism, no strategy, no designed outcome. It was just the truth, which I had found was almost always the most difficult thing to build. The letter took me 3 weeks to write, not because I didn't know what to say. I had known in the general sense for years. The difficulty was precision. A letter like this one has no room for approximation. Every word either carries the right weight or it doesn't, and the ones that don't are worse than silence. I burned 2 drafts. The first was too formal. It read like a legal document, which was the occupational hazard of spending too much time with Maggie. The second was too much the other direction, sentimental in a way that would have embarrassed us both. The third draft found the register I was looking for, plain, direct, honest, in the specific way that honesty requires courage rather than just accuracy. I sealed it in a white envelope, wrote Cole's name on the front in the blue pen I had used for 30 years, and gave it to Maggie on a Thursday in April with instructions that it was to be handed to Cole after the reading, after the room had cleared, after everything legal and documented and procedural had been completed. After I told her, not during, not before, after. She took it without asking what was inside. That was one of the things I had always valued most about Margaret Vance. I asked Cole to come by the house on a Tuesday evening in June. Not Sunday dinner, too many rhythms attached to Sunday dinner, too much ordinary comfort. I needed a different kind of evening. I told Natalie I needed a few hours with my son. She looked at me in the way she had of understanding more than the sentence contained, squeezed my hand once at the door, and left without asking a single question. Cole arrived at 7. The summer light was still good, the long amber kind that makes Hartford look better than it has any right to. He found me on the back porch and pulled a chair close without being asked. You have something on your mind, he said. I have several things on my mind, I said, but only one of them requires this conversation. I reached under the porch table and set the cedar box on my knee. Dark wood brass latch, small key already in the lock. I had bought it at an estate sale 11 years ago because it locked and looked like it had survived worse things than I had. Both remained true. "Open it," I said. He did. Inside a black USB drive, a white envelope with his name in my handwriting and a folded index card with Maggie's office address and a 4-digit access code. The drive, I said, contains everything. Jack's full surveillance reports time-stamped and notarized. Frank's shell company documentation. Sandra's access logs, every file she copied, every transmission she sent. The Delaware Holding Company records. Laura Novak's sworn statement. Dennis Rourke's affidavit about the fire. The vasectomy record. Everything is indexed. Maggie holds the originals. This copy is yours and no one else's. Cole turned the USB drive over in his hand. Once. The way he handled things, he was trying to understand from the outside before he opened them. "And the envelope," he said. "Hey, that one's personal," I said. "Not legal. You open it after the reading, after whatever comes at you in that conference room, and Cole, there will be something after Maggie finishes her work, not before." "What's in it?" "Something I should have said out loud years ago," I said. "But I'm better on paper than I am in person, and I wanted to get it right." He looked at the envelope for a moment, then set it back in the box without touching the seal. "The technical drawings?" I said. "The original site surveys and architectural plans from the first 3 warehouses, 1991, 1994, 1998. They're in the flat files in my office bottom drawer, labeled by year." I paused. "The actual asset schedules for those properties are embedded in the survey documents, not the values Frank's lawyers will find in the company records, the real ones. Maggie knows how to read them. Cole makes sure she looks at them before the settlement transfers are finalized." He was quiet for a moment. "How much of a difference?" "Enough to matter," I said. He closed the box and held it in both hands. "There are going to be people in that room," I said, "who have been building a case for the better part of a year. Russell, Frank, a lawyer named Gould, possibly others. They will say things that sound credible. They may have documentation. They may have a witness I haven't anticipated." I paused. "None of it will hold. But you need to walk in calm and let Maggie work. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation, which was the only answer I would have accepted. We sat quietly for a while. The evening light was doing what evening light does in June, making everything look like it deserved to last. "Are you afraid?" Cole asked. I thought about that. Not the performative version of thinking about it, actually considered it. "I was afraid for about 20 years, I said. Afraid the company would fail, afraid I'd made the wrong decisions, afraid Russell would find a way to undo things I'd spent decades building." I paused. "I stopped being afraid sometime around the day I signed your adoption papers. I've been angry occasionally since then. Mostly I've just been working." Cole looked at me, the way he sometimes looked at things he was committing to memory. "I need you to know something," he said. "Whatever happens in that room." "I know," I said. "Walt." "And I know," I said again. "And so do you." He picked up the box, tucked it under his arm, and stood. He shook my hand firm, deliberate, the handshake of a man who means it, and then pulled me into a brief, solid embrace that said what neither of us needed to say out loud. I watched him cross the yard. At the gate he turned and raised a hand. I raised mine. When his car was gone, I sat in the chair and listened to the neighborhood settling into evening and thought about 3 months and everything they contained. 3 months until the reading. 3 months until the room I had been building toward for 18 months finally opened. 3 months until it ended, or began. The summer passed the way summers do when you are paying close attention to them. Slowly, and then all at once. Jack sent reports every 2 weeks through July and August. I read them at my desk in the early mornings before Sandra arrived, before the day accumulated its ordinary weight. The reports confirmed what I had expected. Russell and Frank were proceeding. The legal strategy was in motion. Patrick Gould had filed preliminary research requests with the Hartford County Probate Court standard pre-contest groundwork, the kind of procedural activity that doesn't constitute a formal challenge but establishes the infrastructure for one. Jack noted that Gould had also subpoenaed 3 years of company financial records, which meant Frank had provided him with enough internal information to know what questions to ask. I knew where that information had come from. Sandra was still at her desk, still efficient, still transmitting. By August, she had sent Frank 41 documents over the course of 11 months. 41 documents, each one carefully constructed, to tell a coherent and entirely false story about the state of my estate, my cognitive condition, and my relationship with Cole. Frank had built his legal strategy on that story. Gould had built his filing approach on that strategy. They were standing on a floor I had poured. I felt reading Jack's August summary, something I recognized as the particular calm of a man who has done the work and is waiting for the work to complete itself. Dr. Crane's September appointment confirmed what I already knew from the way my body had been behaving for several weeks. The deterioration was progressing on schedule, his phrase delivered with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that precision was a form of respect. The medication was managing the symptoms. I was functional. I would remain functional for the foreseeable window. Now, how long is the foreseeable window? I asked. He looked at his notes. 6 to 8 months of your current level of function, he said. Possibly longer if you manage stress and activity. I have one significant event in approximately 4 weeks, I said. After that, I intend to reduce both considerably. He made a note. What kind of event? A meeting, I said. In a conference room. It should take most of a morning. He looked at me over his glasses with the expression doctors develop when they understand that a patient is being technically accurate and comprehensively incomplete. I'll want to see you the week after. I'll be there, I said. I spent the last 2 weeks of September doing something I had not done in 18 months of planning nothing in particular. I went to the office. I reviewed the company's quarterly numbers, which were good. Cole had been running the operational side with the focused competence that had stopped surprising me years ago and started simply being the baseline. I had lunch with Maggie on a Thursday, and we talked about a property case she was handling for another client and did not discuss any of the things we had spent the past year building together, which was a relief to both of us. I sat on the back porch in the evenings. I read. I thought about Harold Mercer, which I did with increasing frequency as the window narrowed, and about what he would have made of the past 18 months. Harold had been a man of deep patience and limited tolerance for dishonesty, which were two qualities that coexisted more rarely than people supposed. I thought he would have understood the plan. I thought he would have had reservations about some of the methods and approved of all of the intentions. That felt about right. Jack called on a Wednesday evening in late September. Gould filed the formal notice of intent to contest. He said, "Yesterday afternoon, Hartford County Probate. It's in the system." "Good," I said. A pause. "You understand that filing triggers the in terrorem clause." "I understand that filing triggers the in terrorem clause." I confirmed. "Which means Russell has already forfeited his bequest," Jack said. "Before the reading, before anything else happens." "Yes," I said. Another pause. Jack did not waste pauses. When he allowed one, it was because something needed space around it. "You've already won," he said. "I've won the legal proceeding," I said. "That's not the same thing as finishing." He understood what I meant. Jack generally did. "The reading is set for the 17th, he said. "Maggie confirmed this afternoon, 10 o'clock, her conference room." "I know," I said. "She called me before she called you. Is there anything you need from me before then?" I thought about the room behind Maggie's office, the monitor, the chair, the cold coffee I had been planning to tolerate for the better part of a year. "One thing," I said. "I need you to confirm the observation setup is operational. Camera feeds recording the works. I want everything documented from the moment the first person walks through that door." "Already done," Jack said. "Tested it yesterday." Good," I said. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time. The office was quiet. Sandra had gone home at 5. The building had the particular stillness of a place that is full of purpose during the day and emptied of it at night. I looked at the frame photograph on the wall, the company's first truck, 1989 white electrical tape on the passenger mirror. I had kept it there for 35 years because it was the most accurate representation I had of where everything had started. One more week. I had told Maggie everything about the plan. Everything except one thing. She knew about the trap, the documents, the clause, the camera, the room behind her office. What she did not know was that I intended to be in it, not watching from a distance. Present. Because some things I had decided required the person who built them to be in the room when they opened. I was in the room behind Maggie's office by 8:45. The monitor was on. Jack had confirmed the camera feeds the previous afternoon, 4 angles covering the conference table, the entrance door, the side entrance, and the wall screen, and the recording system had been running since 8 o'clock. The chair was low-backed and not particularly comfortable, which I had known going in and had decided was appropriate. This was not a morning for comfort. I had brought coffee, hot this time. I had learned from the October I had imagined doing this, and the October I was actually doing it, that the details you can control are worth controlling. I sat and watched the room fill. Cole and Natalie arrived at 9:40. He wore the dark jacket he kept for occasions that required formality without ceremony. I had seen it twice before both times, at events where the appropriate response to the situation was to look composed rather than comfortable. He came through the door the way he did everything, without announcement, without performance, simply present. Natalie walked half a step behind him, close enough to matter, far enough to give him the room the morning required. They sat without discussion, Cole at the head of the table, Natalie to his right. They did not speak to each other. They did not need to. I watched Cole's hands on the table. Flat still, the hands of a man who had decided how he was going to hold himself, and was holding himself that way. 17 years of watching him had taught me to read the difference between Cole performing calm and Cole actually being calm. This morning, it was the latter, which told me everything I needed to know about what the past 6 months had done for him. Russell arrived at 9:52, with Patrick Gould half a step behind. He had aged in the way that men age when the choices they have been making have finally begun to compound. Not dramatically, Russell had always been presentable, and he remained so. But there was a compression around his eyes that hadn't been there 14 months ago, when I had last seen him at a distance through Jack's photographs. The suit was the one from Harold's funeral. I recognized it by the left shoulder. He had kept it for significant occasions, which told me he understood on some level what this morning was. He looked at Cole the moment he entered. Cole looked back. 4 seconds. The kind of silence that doesn't need words, because it already contains everything that has happened between two people over a very long time. Russell had left a 12-year-old boy on a doorstep in July 2008. Cole had grown into the person sitting at the head of that table. The distance between those two facts was not something either of them was going to resolve in 4 seconds. But 4 seconds was enough to establish that both of them understood it. Russell sat on the left side of the table. Gould set his leather folder down, with the careful precision of someone who wanted it, noticed uncapped his pen, and began reviewing his notes with the focused efficiency of a man billing by the hour. Frank came through the side entrance at 9:56. He was alone, which I had expected. The performance of distance from Russell was deliberate. Frank had spent 32 years understanding that optics were a form of argument, and the optic he wanted this morning was independence rather than coordination. Too late, but the instinct was not wrong. He took the chair across from Russell without acknowledging him. He set his pen on the table and began turning it over in his fingers. I had watched Frank turn that pen in meetings for 3 decades. It was his tell the specific physical behavior he defaulted to when he was managing something he couldn't fully control. I noted it and moved on. Laura came in at 9:58 with Oliver at her side. The boy was wearing a collared shirt that had been ironed that morning. I could see the crisp lines at the shoulders from the camera feed. He was 10 years old, and he was looking at the room with the careful, absorbing attention of a child who understood he was somewhere important, without fully understanding why. Laura guided him to 2 chairs along the side wall, said something quietly to him, something brief, something that settled him, and sat. Oliver looked at Russell once. Russell did not look back. I set down my coffee. Maggie entered at exactly 10 o'clock. She set her folder on the table, adjusted her chair, and looked around the room with the measured inventory of a woman who had been in rooms like this for 30 years and understood that the first 30 seconds belonged to whoever controlled them. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "This proceeding is being recorded under Connecticut probate rules with advance notice given to all parties. If anyone has an objection to the recording, now is the appropriate time to raise it." Gould straightened. "On behalf of Russell Mercer, we reserve the right to contest any distribution on grounds of undue influence, cognitive vistoas." "Noted for the record," Maggie said without looking up from her folder. "Anyone else?" The room was silent. "Then we'll begin." She opened the folder and turned on the wall screen. My face appeared. I had recorded the footage in March Maggie's secondary conference room, Blue Shirt the 2 forensic psychiatrists just off camera per Connecticut probate requirements. I had not attempted to look at peace. Peace was not the message. The message was precision, and I had tried to look like a man who had chosen every word carefully and meant all of them. The room changed when the recording started. Not dramatically, nobody moved, nobody spoke, but the quality of the attention shifted. Russell leaned forward slightly. Frank's pen stopped moving. Cole looked at the screen with the particular stillness of a person hearing something for the second time that they understood differently than the first. "If you're watching this," I said on screen, "then Maggie has determined the time is appropriate, which means she is as usual correct about the timing. My name is Walter Mercer. I am of sound mind, full memory, and approximately 63 years of patience, the last of which has been tested more comprehensively than the first two combined over the past 18 months. Russell's jaw tightened. "I want to begin by acknowledging the people who came here this morning because they mean it. You know who you are. To everyone else in the room, I want you to understand something before Maggie proceeds. I have spent the last year and a half not dying. I have spent it building. Everything you are about to hear is the result of that work. I would suggest you listen carefully, because I have not left anything to interpretation." The recording ended. Maggie brought the lights back up. Gould was already leaning forward, folder open. "Before the document reading proceeds, my client formally registers an objection on the basis of..." "Mr. Gould." Maggie's voice did not rise. It simply became more specific. "You will have the floor at the designated point in these proceedings. That point has not arrived." "The designated point should be..." "After I finish," she said, "which I have not done." Gould sat back. He looked at Russell. Russell gave the smallest possible shake of his head. Frank had not spoken. He was looking at the table, the pen still in his fingers, and I recognized from 32 years of partnership the particular quality of his silence, the silence of a man running numbers and not arriving at a total he liked. Maggie read the primary distributions, the foundation assets, the operational transfer, Cole's directorship, the personal bequests to 11 long-term employees delivered without inflection, one name at a time, the scholarship fund, the Oliver Trust structure. Then, "To Russell Mercer, my brother, I leave $1 and the knowledge that I tried for 40 years to give him more than he was willing to accept." The room absorbed that sentence the way rooms absorb things that cannot be taken back. Russell's expression did not change. He had prepared for it. But preparation and experience are different things, and I watched something move through him that he had not fully prepared for. Not anger, not grief, something quieter and more final. The recognition of a door closing on a decision he had made a long time ago. Cole said nothing. He looked at the table. Then the side door opened. Sandra Webb walked in. She was dressed carefully. Dark blazer hair backed the appearance of a woman who had made a decision and dressed for its consequences. She crossed the room without hesitation, pulled out the chair at the foot of the table, and sat. She did not look at Frank. Frank looked at her the way a man looks at something that has just fundamentally altered the arithmetic of his morning. "She works for me," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled. But underneath the control was something I had not heard from Frank Hargrove in 32 years of knowing him. "Fear." "She did," Sandra said. She looked at him directly, steadily, the look of a person who has been carrying something for 4 months and has finally set it down. "I don't anymore." The shift in the room was immediate and complete. Gould looked at Russell. Russell looked at Sandra. Natalie reached under the table and found Cole's hand. Cole did not move, not his hands, not his expression, not the angle of his shoulders. He sat exactly as I had asked him to in June on the back porch in the last of the summer light, patient, giving nothing away. Maggie set down the document she had been reading. She reached for a second folder, thicker than the first, and placed it on the table in front of her. "Before we continue," she said, "Walter Mercer left specific instructions for this moment in these proceedings." She looked around the room, at Russell, at Frank, at Cole. "He asked me to invite someone in." I stood up, set the coffee down, and walked through the door. The hallway between the observation room and the conference room was 11 steps. I had counted them the week before during the camera test, without fully understanding why I was counting. Now I understood. There are moments in a life where the distance between where you are and where you are about to be is measured in something other than feet, and you count, because counting is the last available form of control before you give the rest of it up. I opened the conference room door and stepped in. 9 people, 9 different versions of the same moment. Cole went still first. Not the controlled stillness he had been holding all morning, something deeper. The stillness of a person whose entire framework for the next several hours has just been rewritten in the space of a single second. He looked at me the way you look at something you were certain was one thing and have just discovered is another, not less. Differently. Natalie's hand moved to Cole's arm. Russell's chair scraped back an inch, involuntary. The body's honest response before the mind caught up and reasserted control. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in 60 years. Of knowing it, not anger, not calculation, not the performed warmth he deployed when he needed something. Something rawer than any of those. Something that looked briefly like a man seeing a bill he had not expected to receive. Frank set his pen on the table. He did not pick it up again. I walked to the empty chair at the far end opposite Cole with Maggie to my right and sat down. I took a moment to look around the room. At Russell, at Frank, at Laura, who was watching me from the side wall with the particular composure of a person who had known this was coming and had chosen to be at peace with it. At Oliver, who was looking at me with the direct, uncomplicated attention of a child who had not yet learned to perform indifference. At Cole. "Good morning," I said. The room found its voice in pieces. "You're supposed to be," Russell started. "Dying," I said. "Yes, I've been informed. I've been managing it." I looked at him directly the way you look at someone you have known your entire life and have arrived finally at the end of pretending about. "Hello, Russell." He said nothing. His jaw was tight. Beside him, Gould was very still, the leather folder open in front of him, his pen capped and unmoving the posture of a lawyer, rapidly recalculating the geometry of his position. "Now, I owe several of you an explanation," I said. "Cole?" He was looking at me. Still that deep stillness, but something in it had shifted the shock, settling into something more like recognition. The specific recognition of a person who has just understood a thing they had been close to understanding for a long time. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," I said. The observation room was a precaution that became a decision. I needed to see the room before I walked into it, needed to know what I was walking into. I paused. Old habit. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who understands and is choosing with the discipline that had always been one of his finest qualities to finish the work before he processes the feeling. That was enough. "Mr. Gould," I said, "your client filed a notice of intent to contest this will on September 29th. Maggie." Maggie set a document on the table. Filed and time-stamped, Hartford County Probate Court, September 29th, 2:17 in the afternoon. Under Connecticut General Statutes, Section 45, A-257C, I said, that filing triggered the in terrorem clause in my will, automatically upon filing, not upon adjudication, not upon losing upon filing. Russell Mercer has forfeited all rights and bequests under this document from the moment that notice hit the court system. Gould opened his folder. The in terrorem clause is subject to challenge on grounds of usi. "Mr. Gould." Maggie's voice was patient and precise. "The clause was drafted, reviewed, independently certified, and filed under current Connecticut statute. You are welcome to challenge it. I would strongly recommend a conversation with your malpractice carrier before you do." Gould looked at Russell. Russell was looking at the table. Gould closed the folder. I turned to Frank. "Oh, 32 years, I said. "I want to be accurate about that. What we built together was real, and I have not forgotten it. I want you to know that before the rest of this." Frank's expression did not move, but something behind it did a small, controlled contraction, the look of a man receiving something he had not prepared for and could not immediately process. "Sandra," I said. Sandra Webb opened her folder. She had prepared it with the tabbed index precision of someone who understood that the moment required evidence rather than testimony alone. Between September 2023 and August 2024, she said, I transmitted 41 documents from Walter Mercer's office to Frank Hargrove's personal email account. Each transmission was logged and time-stamped through an IT monitoring system I consented to in writing at the time of my onboarding. She did not look at Frank. Her voice was even. Every document I transmitted was selected and provided to me by Mr. Mercer. The content of each document was deliberately false. Frank's voice came out quiet. "You don't understand what you're—" "I understand exactly what I'm doing," Sandra said. She looked at him, then directly, steadily, without performance. "I've understood for 4 months. That's when I called Maggie's office." "The shell company," I said. I slid a copy of Jack's report across the table toward Frank. "Page 31. The equity stake you have been valuing at $400,000 in your filing. The actual assets held by that entity as of December 2019. I paused. 0. The company has been an empty structure for 5 years. You have been building a legal claim against my estate on the basis of an asset that ceased to exist before the claim was conceived. Frank looked at the document. He looked at it for a long time. The fire, I said. October 2004. Dennis Rourke, a former subcontractor of yours, signed a notarized affidavit in February of this year. He confirmed that you hired him in September 2004 to conduct what you described as a controlled site clearance at the Wethersfield Avenue warehouse. I let that sit. That affidavit, along with Jack Kowalski's full 14-month investigative report, was delivered to the Hartford County District Attorney's Office on the 16th of October, yesterday. The room was completely still. Laura stood from her chair along the side wall. Oliver stayed seated. He was looking at his hands. She set a single page in front of Maggie. Her voice when she spoke was clear and unhurried, the voice of a person who has made a difficult decision and arrived finally at the moment the decision was made for. I have a sworn affidavit confirming that Russell Mercer is Oliver's biological father, she said, and confirming that Russell Mercer approached me in January of this year and asked me to identify Walter Mercer as Oliver's father in these proceedings in exchange for financial compensation. She paused. I declined. I'm here as a witness for the estate. She sat back down. She did not look at Russell. Russell did not look at her. Gould placed his pen in his jacket pocket. He leaned toward Russell and said something too low to hear. Russell listened. He gave a single short nod, the nod of a man who has run the remaining options and found that none of them lead anywhere worth going. They stood. Frank stood a moment later. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, folded it over one arm, and looked at me. Not with anger, not with anything I could give a clean name to. The look of a man who has known someone for a very long time and is seeing them clearly perhaps for the first time and understanding that what he is seeing has always been there. He left through the side entrance. Russell and Gould left through the main door. The room exhaled. Cole was looking at me across the long oak table. The morning light was in the windows. Somewhere down the hall, the ordinary sounds of Maggie's office continued. A phone, a door, a conversation too distant to make out. There was still one thing left, but not here. Not in this room with its cameras and its documents and its 30 years of accumulated history. What came next was between the two of us. After Russell and Frank left the room, changed. Not physically, the table was the same table, the chairs, the same chairs, the October light coming through the same windows at the same angle. But a room where something significant has just finished feels different from a room where something significant is still pending, and this one had crossed that line the moment two sets of footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Maggie gave it 60 seconds. Then she opened the final folder and set 3 documents in front of Cole. "That's the transfer instruments," she said. "Company Equity Foundation Charter Scholarship Fund authorization. When you're ready." Cole looked at the documents. He looked at me, once a brief, specific look that I understood to mean he was still processing, and would be for a while, and that he was choosing with the discipline I had watched him develop over 17 years to finish the procedural work before he did anything else. He picked up the pen. He signed each document as Maggie placed it before him, methodically without theater, the way you do things that matter. The company equity transfer took 4 signatures. The foundation charter took 3. The scholarship fund authorization took 1. Maggie countersigned each, dated them, and set them in a certified folder that she sealed and labeled in her precise handwriting. It took 18 minutes. 18 minutes to complete the transfer of 35 years. When it was done, Cole set the pen down and looked at his hands for a moment. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic person. Just the natural pause of someone at the end of something significant, giving it a moment before moving to whatever comes next. Sandra Webb was still in the room. She had stayed in her chair at the foot of the table after Russell and Frank left, which I had not expected. When the signing was finished, she stood, collected her folder, and looked at Cole. "I want to say something," she said. Cole looked at her. "I was hired to do a job," she said. "I did it. The job turned out to be something different from what I understood it to be." She paused. "I don't expect that to mean much to you. I just wanted to say it." Cole considered her for a moment. "Why did you come to Maggie's office 4 months ago?" She was quiet for a beat. "Because what Russell was planning to do with that boy..." She stopped, looked at the table. "I have a son. He's 7. She stopped again. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth." "It's worth something," Cole said. She nodded once and left. Natalie reached under the table and found Cole's hand. He turned his palm up and held hers. Maggie set her certified folder in her briefcase, locked it, and looked around the room with the assessing attention of someone making sure nothing had been left unfinished. Then she reached into the briefcase again and produced a plain white envelope. No case number, no legal marking, just Cole's name in my handwriting in the blue pen. She set it on the table in front of him. "This is not part of the estate file," she said. "Walter asked me to give it to you after everything else was finished." She looked at me briefly, then back at Cole. He was very specific about the order. Cole looked at the envelope. He did not reach for it immediately. "Give us a few minutes," I said to Maggie. She looked at Natalie. Natalie nodded. They left together, and the door closed, and the room was quiet. Cole and I sat across from each other at the long oak table, with the white envelope between us and 35 years of shared history surrounding us, and neither of us spoke for a moment. "You were in that room the whole time," he said finally. "From 8:45, I said, "and you didn't tell me." "No." He looked at the table. "Were you going to come in regardless, or were you waiting to see if it was necessary?" It was a good question. A very Cole question, precise, aimed at the actual thing, not the surface of it. "Both," I said. "I needed to see the room first. I needed to know what I was walking into. And I needed to know that what I had built held up under real conditions before I put my name on it in person." I paused. "It held up." "Yes," he said, "it did." He looked at the envelope. "That's from me," I said. "Not from the estate, not from the legal file, from me." "I know," he said. "You can read it here," I said. "Or you can take it home. I'm not going to tell you when or how. But I want you to know that whatever is in it, it has been true for a long time. I just needed to find the right words for it." He picked up the envelope. He turned it over once. He looked at me the way he had looked at the USB drive in June on the back porch in the last of the summer light, trying to understand the shape of something from the outside before he opened it. "Walt," he said. "Yes. I'm glad you walked through that door. I thought about Harold Mercer and a file box in a basement and a 4-month-old child who had been given a name by people who owed him nothing. I thought about a Tuesday evening in October 2010 and a boy saying his own name quietly to himself on courthouse steps. I thought about all of it." "So am I said. He stood. He put the envelope in his jacket pocket and buttoned it closed. There were things I had built with paperwork and law and 18 months of careful, exhausting precision. And there was one thing I had built over 17 years with nothing more complicated than showing up and staying. That one was in his pocket now. The rest could wait. Cole opened the envelope at my kitchen table. Not at Maggie's office, not in the car on the way home. He came back to the house Natalie drove separately, understanding as she consistently did when her presence was needed and when it wasn't. And we sat at the kitchen table the way we had sat at kitchen tables for 17 years. I made coffee, he set the envelope in front of him, and looked at it the way he had been looking at it since Maggie placed it in his hands. "You've been waiting a long time to read that," I said. "You've been waiting longer to write it," he said. He opened it. I watched him read. I had written 3 drafts and burned 2 of them, and the third was 4 pages in the blue pen, handwritten, the kind of document that takes longer to produce than its length suggests, because every sentence has to carry its own weight. I knew what it said. I watched his face instead of the pages. He read without stopping. When he reached the end, he turned back to the second page and read something again. I was fairly certain it was the paragraph about Harold, and then he set the pages flat on the table and pressed them smooth with one hand, the way you flatten something you intend to keep. He looked at me. "You were adopted," he said. "Yes," I said. "Harold and Evelyn weren't your biological parents." "No, they were my parents. The biology was Russell's." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the pages. "You've known this your whole life," he said. Then, since I was old enough to understand what the documents in Harold's file box meant, I said, "I was about 14. And you never told anyone." "I told Maggie in September of last year," I said, "because it became legally relevant. Before that, no." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because it didn't change anything that mattered," I said. "Harold was my father. Evelyn was my mother. Russell, knowing I wasn't blood, was his problem to manage, not mine. And after they were gone, I paused. After they were gone, it was just a fact about my history. Not a wound, just a fact." Cole looked at the window. The October afternoon was doing its best outside, pale, light, bare branches, the particular clarity of a late-season day that has nothing left to prove. The letter says you recognized something in me, he said. When I was 12. I did. What did you recognize? Or the arithmetic, I said. The specific arithmetic of being told by other people's choices that you don't count. That you're the category of person things happen to, rather than the category of person things are done for. I paused. I had stood in that arithmetic. I knew what it felt like from the inside. When I saw it in you, I didn't need more time to decide what I was going to do about it. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator ran. The ordinary house sounds that fill the spaces between the things that matter. Russell always knew, Cole said. It was not a question. Russell always knew, I confirmed. That I wasn't blood. That the name was given, not inherited. He managed that knowledge the way he managed most things, by converting it into something he could use eventually when the moment was right. The contest. Yes. He thought that because you weren't Harold's biological son, your standing was weaker. He thought a great many things that turned out to be wrong, I said. Cole almost smiled at that. Not quite, but close. He picked up the pages and read the last paragraph again. I knew which one, the one about family, and what the word actually meant. I had rewritten that paragraph 4 times across 3 drafts. The final version was the shortest. The right things usually are. He set the pages down. The part about chosen family, he said. Yes. You wrote that it's not a consolation prize. It isn't, I said. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you this because it's the better version of a worse story. I'm telling you because it is, in my experience, the truest version of what family actually is. Harold chose me. I chose you. You, over 17 years, in every way that counted, chose back. I paused. That's not a lesser thing than blood. It's a different thing, and in my experience, it's a more deliberate one. He looked at me for a long time. I have a question, he said. Ask it. Natalie is pregnant, he said. I did not say anything for a moment. We found out 3 weeks ago, he said. We haven't told anyone yet. He paused. I wanted to tell you first, before anyone else. I looked at him. The October light was in the window. The house was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a child was calling to someone, the particular high clarity of a young voice carrying across an autumn afternoon. I thought about Harold Mercer, who had chosen a 4-month-old child because choosing was what he did. I thought about what it meant to be the beginning of something that continued. What are you going to name it? I said. Cole looked at the table. A pause. If it's a boy, he said, we thought Harold. I looked at my kitchen wall for a long moment. I did not trust my voice immediately, so I waited until I did. That's a good name, I said. It's held up well. December comes quietly in Hartford. Not with drama, no sudden cold front, no single morning that announces the season has changed. Just a gradual narrowing of the light, the days shortening by minutes, the trees finally giving up the last of what they had been holding on to since October. By December, you understand that the year is finished, and what it contained is now simply what it was. I visited Harold and Evelyn's grave on the 14th. Cole came with me. Natalie stayed home. She was 8 months along, and had declared with the cheerful practicality that I had come to regard as one of her finest qualities, that she was no longer doing anything that required standing on uneven ground. The baby was due in January. They had settled on Harold for a boy. For a girl, they were still deciding. The cemetery was quiet. A Tuesday morning gray sky, the particular stillness of a place that has made its peace with everything that happens nearby. Harold and Evelyn Stone was simple. Their names, their dates, nothing more, which was exactly what Harold would have wanted. He had been a man who believed that a life spoke for itself, or it didn't, and that the stone was beside the point. I stood there for a while. Cole stood beside me, with his hands in his coat pockets. Frank's hearing is in February, he said. I know, I said. Maggie sent the notice last week. The DA's office had moved quickly by legal standards. The arson investigation reopened in October, based on Dennis Rourke's affidavit and Jack's compiled report, had produced enough for a formal indictment by November. Conspiracy to commit arson, insurance fraud, destruction of property. Frank had hired a criminal defense attorney out of New Haven, and was, according to Jack's last update, preparing to negotiate. Will he take a deal? Cole asked. Probably, I said. Frank has always been practical about the things that cost him. When the math stops working, he adjusts. Cole nodded. Russell, wool. And, I said, Atlanta, according to Jack's last report, somewhere past Atlanta probably. The debt structure we put in place through the Delaware holding company means his options are limited. He can stay gone, or he can come back and deal with the financial reality. I don't expect him back." We stood quietly for a moment. "And the technical drawings," Cole said. This was the piece I had been waiting to explain fully, not because it was complicated, but because some things are better said in person in the right moment than at a conference table with lawyers present. "The original site surveys for the first 3 warehouses," I said, 1991, 1994, 1998. When Frank and I structured the partnership in 1991, we agreed that certain legacy assets would be held separately outside the standard company ledger, indexed only in the original architectural documentation. Frank proposed it, actually. He thought it was a way to protect both of us from liability exposure on the older properties. "He forgot about it," Cole said. "He forgot about it," I confirmed. "Or he assumed the properties had depreciated to the point where they were irrelevant. They hadn't. 3 industrial parcels in Hartford County carried at original survey value in the company, record's current market value approximately 4 times that. Maggie found them when she went through the flat files in November." I paused. "The settlement transfer is processing now. It should finalize before the end of the month." Cole was quiet for a moment. "How much?" he said. "Enough to endow the scholarship fund for 20 years, I said, "and fund the Oliver Trust to full term, and still leave the company balance sheet where it needs to be." He looked at Harold Stone. "He would have thought this was very complicated," Cole said. "Harold?" "Harold thought anything with more than 3 steps was unnecessarily complicated," I said. He was usually right. We stayed a while longer. The scholarship fund had awarded its first grant in September, a young man from West Hartford studying civil engineering at UConn. Maggie had sent me the letter he had written to the fund. I had read it twice and put it in the file box I had inherited from Harold, which I kept in my study and had always intended to organize and never quite gotten around to. Oliver Novak had been enrolled in the trust program in November. Laura had sent a photograph Oliver at his school desk, a project spread in front of him, concentrating with the focused attention of a child who had decided that whatever came next was worth preparing for. I had put that in the file box, too. I looked at Evelyn's name on the stone, then Harold's. Harold Mercer had been given a child he had not planned for by a welfare office in western Connecticut in the spring of 1961. He had taken that child home, given him a name, and proceeded to love him without ceremony for the next 30 years. He had not, as far as I could tell, considered this remarkable. It was simply what you did when a person needed a home, and you had one. I had spent 63 years learning to do the same thing. I was still learning. "There's something I've been thinking about," I said. Cole looked at me. "When the baby comes," I said, "I want to be the kind of person Harold was. For the child." I paused. "Not the person who built the trap, not the lawyer's client, not the company owner." I paused again. "Just the person who shows up." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You've always been that person," he said. "The other things were in addition to it." I thought about that. "I want you to have the file box," I said. "Harold's, when the time is right. There's nothing in it that requires action, just the record of how things went. The adoption papers, some photographs, a letter Evelyn wrote Harold that I found after she died and never had the heart to move." I paused. "And now Oliver's photograph, and the scholarship letter." "You're adding to it," Cole said. "That's what file boxes are for," I said. We walked back to the car through the December quiet. I looked back once at the stone Harold's name, Evelyn's name, the dates that bracketed 2 lives that had been in all the ways that mattered well spent. I thought I kept the name. I did what you showed me, and the name will carry further than either of us expected. That felt like enough. That felt, in fact, like exactly enough. Looking back at everything, the fire, the documents, the room behind Maggie's office, the envelope, the stone. In December, I keep returning to one thought. I was given a name I didn't earn by blood. I was given a home I didn't plan for. And somewhere in 63 years of living inside both of those gifts, I learned that the people who stay are worth more than the people who share your DNA. That is not my wisdom. That is older than me. I believe God puts certain people in your path, not because you deserve them, but because you need them, and because they need you. Harold Mercer was that for me. Cole was that for me. I hope in whatever years remain to be, that for a child named Harold who isn't born yet, here is what I would tell you, as someone who has lived this family story from the inside: do not do what I did. Do not wait for a diagnosis before you protect the people you love. Do not let loyalty become silence. Family betrayal does not announce itself. It arrives in small, quiet calculations over years, wearing the face of someone you chose to trust. And when family betrayal finally shows itself, it is almost never a surprise. It is a confirmation of something you already knew and chose not to see. I chose not to see it for 40 years. Don't make the same mistake. My personal belief is simple family betrayal is survivable, but only if you've already built something real to return to. The family you choose, the people who stay the name you pass forward, that is what survives everything else. This has been one man's family story, imperfect, expensive, and worth every careful step. This is also a family story that isn't finished. The best ones never are. If any part of this stayed with you, leave it in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, we'll be here. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements constructed for the purpose of exploration and reflection. If that's not the journey you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Choose what serves you best. For everyone else, we'll see you in the next one.